Welcome back, everybody, to another Tillerman video. With the draft concluded and most of the important offseason moves finished, I thought it would be a good idea to rank every team's offseason. And without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so this will be just the NFC teams in this video. So the AFC teams will be coming out in a separate video coming soon after this one. The first team to talk about is the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals did grab a few nice pieces in the offseason, like Sean Murphy-Bunting and Justin Jones. Also bring in Desmond Ridder, which is kind of controversial, but still pretty good. Did lose their entire receiving core, though, so that's definitely what they need in the draft. And in the draft, they selected the arguably best wide receiver in Marvin Harrison, grabbed a nice piece in Darius Robinson, and also added to the running back room with Trey Benson. Some of their needs that they need still are more wide receivers for the wide receiver room and some more O-line and cornerback help. Overall, I would grade their offseason as a C at best. Next up is the Atlanta Falcons. They, of course, picked up quarterback Kirk Cousins and some wide receivers, names of Darnell Mooney, Rondale Moore. So overall, that was good for them, but they did lose some good other wide receiver pieces like Van Jefferson and Cordell Patterson. Also got rid of Desmond Ridder at QB, obviously, with Kirk Cousins. And in the draft, probably the biggest surprise, they picked Michael Penix at pick 8. Also picked up D-tackle in the second, which most people don't really agree with as well. Also picked up a few other pieces in the draft, but not any too significant. The team as a whole doesn't look too bad, but they still need some D-line and O-line help, as well as a good third wide receiver. Even despite the bad draft, I'm still going to give them a B- for their offseason grade. Next up is the division rival Panthers, and they signed a few good players, as in Jadeveon Clowney, Dane Jackson, Deontay Johnson, also DJ Wanham. Deontay Johnson should be pretty good for Bryce Young, but they also lost a lot of their defense. Brian Burns, Jeremy Chin, Dante Jackson, Frankie Louvu, all good players that they lost. So in the draft, they had to get some good players, and in the draft, they got Xavier Leggett at the end of the first round, pretty good wide receiver. They also grabbed a running back in Jonathan Brooks, and some other good players at the back end in the 4th, 5th, and 6th rounds. I think this team is going to look much different this year. They still have many needs, of course. The biggest needs being center, tight end, and more O-line help. And for that reason, I'm going to have to give the Panthers a grade of C- for this offseason. Another team looking for a better year in terms of record this year is the Chicago Bears. And in the offseason, they kind of went pretty crazy with their additions. They picked up Keenan Allen, Kevin Byard, Gerald Everett, DeAndre Swift, and other good players. They didn't lose too much either. They got rid of Dan Feeney, a guard, Dante Foreman, Darnell Mooney, Justin Jones, and they also got rid of Justin Fields so that they could go into the draft and grab, at number 1, Caleb Williams, which, I don't know, I think he's going to be good, but he's the number 1 pick. Sometimes those don't work out. They also got Rome Odunze at the 9th overall pick, and they didn't have very many picks later in the draft, but they also picked out Troy Taylor, a punter, in the 4th round, and other skill players. Despite the loaded offensive pieces in the wide receivers, quarterback room, and running back room, the Bears team doesn't actually look that good. They still have a lot of holes to patch, which would be the O-line, defensive line, and cornerback room, because they're still really weak there. So because of that, I'm going to have to give the Chicago Bears an A- for their efforts. The next team on the list is the Dallas Cowboys. Now, they didn't really sign too many free agents, only signing Eric Kendricks, Ezekiel Elliott, and Damian Wilson, but they did lose a lot of good players, such as Their center, Tyler Biadasz, Lyle Collins, Dante Fowler, Tony Pollard, Tyron Smith. So in the draft, they needed to make some moves, but they did not, picking up just Tyler Guyton, Marshawn Nealand, Cooper Beebe, and Kalen Carson, and a couple other skill positions. The team as a whole is pretty much the same except for the O-line needs some help still. And wide receiver room does look a little shallow. And they still need a good running back. Due to these, I gave the Dallas Cowboys a D- grade. Another team without too many weaknesses is the Detroit Lions, who in the offseason picked up Marcus Davenport from the division rival Vikings, Carlton Davis, DJ Reader, Kevin Zeitler, and Amik Robertson, so not too much. And their losses were CJ Gardner-Johnson, Benito Jones, Josh Reynolds. Now, Josh Reynolds was a good piece for them last year, but I think it was okay for them to move on from him. In the draft, they picked up Terrion Arnold, one of the better cornerbacks, and Ennis Rakestraw. They also picked up a two-way player in Sion Vaki in the 4th round, who is interesting, and a few other skill position players in the draft. Now, I do think that their team is pretty complete, but a few good additions they could have made was defensive tackle, another good wide receiver just to fill out the room, and an edge piece to fill it out. But they still had a pretty solid offseason, so I gave them an A-. Another NFC North team is the Green Bay Packers. They picked up some nice pieces in the offseason, including Josh Jacobs, Greg Joseph, Xavier McKinney, and then they also had a few losses as well in David Bakhtiari, Devondre Campbell, Aaron Jones, and Darnell Savage. So pretty good on the adds and pretty bad on the losses. So pretty average right there in the offseason moves. But in the draft, their first pick was Jordan Morgan, which I had not heard of before. And then they got Adrian Cooper and Javon Bullard, which were both pretty good picks. And they had a mountain of other picks later in the draft, and they picked up some okay pieces there. Their team looks a lot better than it did last year, and they went pretty far last year. Some other needs that they still need is another offensive tackle, a guard, and then probably some more cornerbacks, even though they got one in the draft. So that got me to warrant them a B+. The next team up is the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams added Jimmy Garoppolo, Cameron Curl, Darius Williams, Tre'Davious White, and Jonah Jackson, and they lost Aaron Donald to retirement, Jordan Fuller, Colton Shelton, Carson Wentz, and Jonah Williams. In the draft this year, they finally had a first-round pick where they picked up Jared Verse, and then they also picked up Braden Fisk and Blake Corum in the later rounds, and Cameron Kinchins and some other good players later in the 6th and 7th rounds. The Rams overachieved last year, but I still think they need some needs this year. They need some more O-line, some more cornerback help, and some D-line help. But overall, they had a pretty nice offseason, so I gave them a B grade. The next team is the final of the NFC North teams, is the Minnesota Vikings. They added Blake Cashman, Sam Darnold as their quarterback to start, Jonathan Grenard, Shaq Griffin, Aaron Jones, Andrew Van Ginkel, and other players. They did lose Kirk Cousins and Danielle Hunter, along with Alexander Madison, Greg Joseph, Marcus Davenport, KJ Osborne, DJ Wanham, and Jordan Hicks. So pretty big losses there. In the draft, they moved up one spot just to get J.J. McCarthy, and also moved up to get Dallas Turner, both in the first. Pretty good signings. Then they picked up a few other good players, along with a kicker, which they needed, in the back end of the draft. The Vikings did lose a good number of players to their starting set, so I do think that they need another good wide receiver to join Addison and Jefferson there in Minnesota, along with some more cornerback help, because they don't have much talent back there, and an extra guard would be nice. This nets them a B- grade. The next team up is the New Orleans Saints. They added Willie Gay, Cedric Wilson, Chase Young, and they also lost Malcolm Roach Jameis Winston, Zach Bond. So not much on both sides, but Chase Young should be a good addition for them. Wasn't too impressive last year, but I think they needed the help at that position. In the draft, they went out and grabbed Fuaga in the first, then Kool-Aid McKinstry in the second, and then they also grabbed Bub Means and Spencer Rattler in some later rounds, which were some good pickups in my opinion, along with their other players in the draft. Some other needs that they need is some more cornerback help. Offensive tackle is a position of need, and they're searching for a good number 3 wide receiver. These changes netted them a C grade. Next in line is the New York Giants. They underperformed last year, so they bring in Brian Burns, Isaiah McKenzie, Jalen Mills, Jordan Phillips, Devin Singletary, and John Runyon, and they lost Saquon Barkley, Xavier McKinney, Tyrod Taylor, and Jahad Ward. So definitely better on the addition sides, but losing Saquon and McKinney are not going to be too helpful for themselves. In the draft, they addressed their wide receiver need and safety need and picked up Malik Neighbors and Tyler Nubin. The rest of their draft wasn't anything impressive, so they'll be looking forward to signing some other players next year. They also did not pick up a quarterback in the draft, which means they'll be rocking with Daniel Jones for this year, which leads to their biggest needs being quarterback, offensive line, and cornerback. This netted them with a B- grade for the offseason. Next is the division rival Eagles, who bring in division rival Saquon Barkley, along with Paris Campbell, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Bryce Huff, Devontae Parker, and other good players. But they did lose Kevin Byard, Fletcher Cox, and Jason Kelsey, both of those two from retirement. They also lost Marcus Mariota and Hassan Reddick, along with DeAndre Swift and Quez Watkins. So they did lose a lot in free agency, but also bring in some good players as well. And in the draft, they addressed their biggest need, which was cornerback, taking 2 of the best ones in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. They also got some good other players in the back half of the draft, Jeremiah Trotter and Johnny Wilson, and some other good picks back there. Their team does look pretty strong this year, but I feel like they still need a good center, or the one that they took needs to be pretty good. They do need to replace Hassan Reddick's gap at the linebacker position, and they should use another guard. That's why the grade that I gave them was an A. The next team up is the defending NFC champions, the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers added some good players in the offseason. They included Devondre Campbell, Josh Dobbs at quarterback, and Yetur Gross-Matos, Rock Ya-Sin as well. But they did lose some really good players for them: Eric Armstead, Sam Darnold, Randy Gregory, Javon Kinlaw, Matt Pryor, and Chase Young. To fill their holes, they did pick up Ricky Pearsall in the first round, which was, I think, a reach in my opinion. They did not get too much good at the end of the draft, but I think they still had some good backup players come from it. Since their draft and offseason weren't too crazy, their needs still stand as offensive tackle, guard, and safety. So the best that I could give them was a B- grade. A division rival of the 49ers and the final team of the NFC West is the Seattle Seahawks. They added Jerome Baker, George Fant, Rayshon Hankins, Laken Tomlinson, and they lost Jordan Brooks, Devin Bush, Will Dissly, Mario Edwards, and Drew Lock. So not much on both sides. So they were trying to get things in the draft. In the draft, they picked up Byron Murphy at the 16th pick, probably their best pick of the night. I think it was a great fit for them, and the rest of their picks were average at best. Christian Haynes in the 3rd, and a number of 6th round picks. They are still lacking at the guard position, and the linebacker position, as well as the safety position as well. They need more skill players there. They do have some good players at those positions, but it would be great for them to have more. Another extra need would be another QB once Geno Smith is done with his stint in Seattle, seeing as he isn't really bringing them much, but he's still good enough to play. So that is why I gave them a B grade. The last of the NFC South teams is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They added Randy Gregory, Bryce Hall, Jordan Whitehead, and they lost Shaquille Barrett, Carlton Davis, Devin White. So they didn't really add much on their team, and they also did not cut too many people. Though Bryce Hall is still a good pickup, along with Randy Gregory, and Shaquille Barrett and Carlton Davis are some big losses, along with Devin White, but it was manageable for them. In the draft, they picked up Graham Barton at pick 26th, and Chris Braswell in the second round with their 25th pick. Those were their two best picks of the draft, and the rest of them were all pretty good backup players. The top needs of the Buccaneers heading into the season are cornerback, interior O-line, and another wide receiver to go with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, leading to me giving them a C+ grade. The last team coming from the NFC East Division and the last team on this list is the Washington Commanders. The Commanders added Jeremy Chin, Austin Eckler, Dante Fowler, and Frankie Louvu, and Marcus Mariota and Bobby Wagner, and they lost Cody Barton, Jacoby Brissett, Cameron Curl, Kendall Fuller, Antonio Gibson, and Joey Sly. So they definitely lost way more than they gained, but they still got some good pieces with Jeremy Chin. Austin Eckler is supposed to be good, but he had a down year last year, so I don't know how that's going to play out for them, even though they already have a talented running back. In the draft, they picked at the second spot and grabbed Jaden Daniels. They also picked up Zerjon Newton in the second round with the 4th pick, and they picked up some okay players in the rest of the draft, including Luke McCaffrey and Brandon Coleman. But the Commanders are still a pretty flawed team, needing more wide receiver help outside of Terry McLaurin, and they need some offensive tackle help and some cornerbacks. But overall, their offseason wasn't too bad, and it could still be way better than it could be, for what most people will think, and I gave them a B+ grade for it. And that's going to conclude my ranking of every NFC team's offseason grades. Thank you all for watching, everybody. Leave a comment down below of what you think of my takes or anything else. And remember, y'all, subscribe, like, share, do all YouTube stuff. And that's it for this one. Peace.